This is Vinta Andrada. Now, this is such a dark green ink that it might be able to pass as a black that is kind of different. The green is especially noticeable in the chromatography. A very consistent dark green that has no tone shift as the paper changes and offers no shading at all. On non-fountain pen friendly paper, it doesn't feather or spread, but it does get deep into the paper, making the back of the page unusable. I enjoyed my time with this ink and would be very happy to spend more time with it, either in the form of another sample or even a bottle.
The pen for today is a Lamy All-Star. So now that we know my opinion on this ink, let's see how we got there by looking at the first writing sample done on Clairfontaine.
Take a look at that dark green, so dark, almost black, especially on this very white paper. It doesn't feather, doesn't spread, doesn't shade, just like I had said. It does give great performance the whole way, and it does continuously come across as this almost black, but something slightly different about it, sort of black, because it's a very dark green. Looking at the back of the page, you see that there is just one spot here that it seemed to have got a little aggressive, a little deep into the page, but other than that, we have no bleeding, no ghosting, just that one freakish spot. It didn't touch the page underneath. It would not stop you from using the back of the page. This is a great ink.
Vinta makes more than just one ink. So let's take a look at a few other inks from Vinta. Here is Vinta Terracotta de Milly.
Here is Vinta Mascara. Here is Vinta Romblon.
Here is Vinta St. John's Laguna. The second writing sample is done in a Portage Reporter notebook.
We can see clearly here in the side-by-side there is no tone shift at all when it comes to changing from the Clairfontaine paper. Now, it does not feather and it does not spread. It does not shade. Just as we would expect, it gives this great, it's really immaculate as a performance. Very happy with it. Like I said, I'd love to spend some more time with this ink. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding, no ghosting, no problem continuing our notes back here.
There's a lot to be learned by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. A line of ink is put down to immediately put into water to show the separation of those colors, making the ink. Now the one on the right is marked with a D. This is allowed to dry for 10 minutes before it's put into water. The third writing sample is done in a national brand Steno notebook.
Looking at the toned paper, this is where we might see some tone shift as a result of it. Not gonna happen. This is very opaque, very opaque. Good Lord. There is no tone shift at all. It does not feather. It does not spread. It does not shade. It just performs the way a good ink should. Looking at the back of the page, you see that it does get very deep into the page, a whole lot. None of these spots touch the page underneath, but I don't know that you'd want to continue your writing back here. There's a fair amount of ghosting. I just feel like you might confuse both sides of your notes if you did it. But if you're one-side writer, or I'm a one-side writer in these notebooks, then it's a really good option.
Resistance tests are done to see how well this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. Now, the smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. In the upper left, you can see where there is highlighter. In the upper right, that is pen flush. The lower left has a 1/3 bleach solution, and the lower right has plain old water. The next writing sample is done in a Rhodia notebook.
Here we get no tone shift as we're looking at the Rhodia compared to the Clairfontaine. Exactly the same tone. Nothing going on at all. No feather, no spread, no shading. Stands out against the quad rule with no problems at all. Certainly what we're looking for in this case. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding, no ghosting, and can easily continue our notes back here.
With over 1,000 inks reviewed, let's take a look at a few more green inks. Here is Ackerman Dutch Masters number 10.
Here is Ancient Charm, on the love of Lotus. Here is Aurora Green.
Here is Birmingham Pen Company Forbes Field Green. All of the inks that you just saw have a review here on the channel. Now, the next writing sample is done in a composition lab notebook.
We can see that we get no tone shift on the composition notebook. We also see that we get no feathering, we get no spread, we get no shading. We get it standing out great against the quad rule. Really, the quad rule disappears into the background. You don't see it at all. What a great ink for a student to use. Looking at the back of the page, continuing that great use for students. We get no bleeding, no ghosting. You can easily continue those important lab notes back here.
While it's nice to see inks that are in the same color family, I prefer to find inks that complement the color on the page. Here is Noodler's Apache Sunset. Here is Geherbon Larmes de Cassis. Here is Mont Blanc Ultra Black. Here is Diamine Vermilion. The best way you can support this or any channel that you like watching is to alert the retailer of where you saw the product at time of purchase. Now, the last writing sample is done on 20-pound copy paper.
We can see that we get no tone shift when we go to the copy paper, which is very nice. It often has a bit of a shift that goes on. Now, there are a couple of moments you really could find if you wanted to for some feathering, if you really wanted to nitpick at things. However, any of the minor feathering that does occur, I don't think would stop the use of this ink on this paper. There is a little bit of spread, which is normal for this paper. There's no shading. I think we've got pretty good performance here so far. Looking at the back of the page, you see that it does get quite deep into the paper, meaning you would not want to continue your notes on the back. It does not bleed through touching the page underneath, making this good for use on cheap copy paper.
So what nib and pen do I think are going to give the best writing experience with this ink?
The Lamy All-Star Broad has a nice medium flow and is super consistent in tone and no shading. Off camera, I used a dry find to see if there was any tone change, and it did become a little more noticeably green than its very dark version, and not confused at all with being a black. So the much more noticeable, very dark green came from this. It generally looks good from any pen. So the tone you want may be dictated by what pen you choose. But for me, I go for a dry finer medium to get a noticeably dark green, even though it won't shade much, if any at all.